I just finished watching the 2022 adaptation for the movie Firestarter, which is based off of the Stephen King book, Firestarter. I haven't watched the previous movie, but I have read the book, and in this video we're going to be talking about the movie as well as how it served as an adaptation to King's book. We're going to start off the video with some spoiler-free, very general thoughts, nothing. I'm not gonna tell you anything that wasn't in the trailer. We're gonna get into spoilers, where I have the most things to say, and then we'll get to final thoughts. So if you're a spoiler-free person, there are timestamps you can skip around. You can hang out with me. So Firestarter, the basic premise of this is that Andy and Vicky, when they were in college, they needed some cash. So there was this experimental drug that they were trying out on some people. Some people were getting a placebo. They were just getting water shot into their veins. Some people were getting this drug. You didn't know which one you were going to be, and they were just going to see what its effects were. Totally safe, totally harmless, nothing wrong, nothing to be worried about, right? That's the basis of an interesting story. Maybe they weren't telling you everything. So Andy and Vicky were both test subjects. They needed some money. They got paid $200. This book was published in 1980. And this is a flashback from 1970, I think. So $200 by then, it was good. They were getting paid good money. Anyway, as you might expect, the experiments weren't all that they appeared to be. They were actually trying to see if they could invoke some telekinetic abilities in the characters, and they did, and both Andy and Vicky had telekinetic powers. They could both do the push, which means that they could kind of push their will onto another person, make them think different things, make them believe different things, make them act in ways against what they would naturally do. And then they had a child named Charlie. Charlie is a fire starter. She's able to start fires with a thought. As you might imagine, this is very dangerous in a child who has no control over their abilities or their emotions, so it can be very dangerous very quickly. The people who conducted the experiments are now after Charlie because they want to observe her, but the parents don't want that, so they're on the run. That is the general setup that you get from the beginning of the book and pretty early on in the movie as well. The movie is only an hour and a half, and throughout the entire first hour, I was thinking, why are we having so much dead space in this movie? Why are we just sitting around for so much of this movie? There's so much to do, and you're running out of time. And I realize now why I had that impending, you don't have enough time to do all that there is to do, and it's because they just didn't do it. It's wild. But anyway, spoiler free. For the first half of the movie, I actually felt that the adaptation did a pretty good job. The setup was really good. They did a good job of establishing the story in a concise and at least mildly engaging way. They were fairly loyal to the book, which I really don't expect an adaptation to be a scene for scene, shot for shot. Like, I don't care if you change some things. I just want you to keep what the heart of the story is. Still keep that, and then show it. It's a new medium. Show it in a new way. That's fine. And in the first half of the movie, I thought they did a great job. They added scenes in order to make exposition more seamless in this different medium. They conflated some scenes, took two things and made them into one in order to tighten up pacing. And there were some scenes, you know, this book was written in 1980. There were some scenes that didn't age well. And the movie, some of those scenes they completely cut, and others they took the core of what the scene was doing and they just changed it so that the idea still came across in a better way. And that's exactly what an adaptation should do. It was perfect. The main problem with the adaptation was just that it wasn't very interesting. The first half of the movie they did all the technical things as far as establishing the story correctly, but it just wasn't very engaging. And the book isn't very fast-paced either, but it's interesting. King is an excellent writer. He's very, very good. I have my issues with King. but he's very good at being very engaging, even in scenes that aren't actually interesting. I'm still drawn in. The movie took scenes that weren't actually interesting and were also just boring. There were some inconsistencies. One of the main things that the movie changed in order to make it more visually clear what was going on is in the book, whenever Andy does his push, he gets a headache, and if it's just a small push, and if he hasn't done if he hasn't pushed on people very much, then it's just a small little headache. But if he's pushing on people a lot, if he's doing it very often, then it becomes a migraine. He can barely function past it, or if he's pushing people too hard. Basically, the more he expends, the more it physically affects him, right? In the movie, instead of it being a headache, his eyes bleed, which is fine. That's a more visual representation of the exact same thing. No problem with this change. In the movie, no matter how much he expends, his eyes always bleed. That is established from the very beginning. The slightest push, bleeding eyes. And that is consistent throughout the entire movie, except for a single scene where, for whatever reason, his eyes, you know what, I know the reason. His eyes don't bleed in that scene, because if they did, then the fella who he's pushing would say, "What's that? Don't trust you anymore, sir." So I don't like that, but it is a nitpick. Fine. As far as the spoiler-free section, my only complaint is it just wasn't engaging. It's a slow-paced story, and that's fine, but it failed at really attaching us to the characters enough for us to be alongside the slower pacing with them. Now let's get into the spoilers. This is where I have the most to say, because the main problems with the story are in the second half, in my opinion. So timestamps in the description where you can just go to final thoughts, where I'm going to, give final thoughts. But for now, for those of you who have already watched the movie or who generally don't care to watch the movie, let's hang out and talk a little bit. If you're on the fence on if you should watch the movie or not, and you're curious about what I think about it, I would say just go with not, because it's not good. I do think that the actors did a good job, but generally it just wasn't very interesting. So spoilers. One of the main things that they changed is Charlie's character as a whole. In the book, Charlie is a very timid child. There's this one scene in the movie where Charlie gets scratched by a rogue cat, and out of her anger, she burns it, but only to the point where it's just lying there burnt up and suffering. And Charlie is sad about it, but also, what are you gonna do? And then her dad comes up to her and she's like, all right, this is the consequence of what you're doing. You're now causing suffering, so now you have to finish this, right? In the book, she set something on fire in the house, and her dad realizes this is dangerous, and in order to protect us so that she doesn't end up burning myself or my wife at some point, I need to hammer into her why she can't let her emotions take control, and she can't just be lighting things on fire as a whoopsie. And so he takes her teddy bear and he says, look at the teddy bear. You see this? Does this make you happy? Do you like the way your teddy looks right now as it's cindering and melting? And it's a terrible scene, but we understand the scene because he's thinking to himself, like, that scene is tearing him apart. He hates that he's doing this to his daughter, but he also understands that he absolutely has to in order to protect her and in order to teach her quickly not to let her emotions control her. And in the book, the purpose of this was for Charlie to then never use her abilities and to keep it within herself and refuse to use it because she doesn't want to cause harm to people, because she doesn't want to hurt anyone, and because she generally considers herself a bad person for having these abilities, and she would be a bad person if she used them. In the movie, I think the scene itself was fine because the dad, Andy, tells her, you started this, you gotta finish it. And he makes her kill the cat. He makes her finish it so that she can see the consequences of what she's doing. But then the way they pay it off isn't in who Charlie develops to be as a person. Instead, they just pay it off by her burning some guy in a car later on. And then she's like, oh, I gotta finish this. So then she just kills the guy because can't leave him to suffer, which is a weird way to pay that thing off. In the book, it's an essential part of who Charlie is. It makes her resist using her abilities, which is an essential part to the plot, but you wouldn't know it because that part of the plot is cut from the movie, unfortunately, because it's a really good part of the plot. So one thing that they severely cut down, and again, it's cool to cut stuff down. It's cool to trim things. You only have so much, the book is over 500 pages. You're not going to adapt that entire thing into a single movie. You just won't. That's fine. Cut stuff down. One thing that they cut down, which is really significant, is a large part of the book is spent with Charlie in captivity. In the movie, only Andy is captured and Charlie gets away, and then Charlie kind of makes this switch where now she's like, I'm going to go find my dad, I'm going to set him free, I'm going to do anything and everything to get us back together. In the book, they're both captured and they're separated. Andy is drugged, and Charlie, they are trying to get her to use her abilities so that they can observe it and so that they can do what they need to do. So they can't get her to use her abilities because of this core scene in the book with the teddy bear. She refuses to use her abilities. So this character, John, who is in the movie, John, what's his last name? Rainbird. John Rainbird, who plays a really different role. In the movie, he is on their team. He's a part of this. He's trying to get her to do all this stuff too. He's a really, really twisted character. I could spend a lot of time talking about him because I actually think that he's a phenomenal character in the book. I think King did a home run with his character. In the movie, he's kind of not really there. He's barely even notable. He does kill Charlie's mom, and that's basically all. In the book, he is one of the most significant characters. He, as Charlie's in captivity, as they're trying to observe her, he's the one that breaks through because he pretends to be a janitor, and he goes into her room every day, vacuums her carpets, mops her floors, and tells her, oh, in this room in the kitchen, it's not bugged. Or if we whisper, then the cameras can't hear us. And because she's a young child, she buys it. And because of some scenes where John fakes some extreme vulnerability, Charlie bonds with him, and they have this sort of conspirator way about them where Charlie refuses to work with the people who have captured her, but John, who's just a guy who comes to clean the floors, she develops a really, really strong bond and relationship with. And because the perspective in the book is switching back and forth, we have Charlie who trusts him and who is being slowly manipulated by him, and then we have him who's acting vulnerable and who's acting like her pal, but in his mind he's always calculating and he's always thinking and he's always seeing, how far can I push her? How much can I urge her? No, okay, oh, that was too far. Pulling it back. I'm gonna be quiet for a couple of days. I'm just gonna be her friend. Okay, now I'll start pushing a little bit more. And he's not a magic user. He doesn't have these abilities. He's just a guy who's really twisted, who's trying to manipulate a child, and he's really, really good at it. And we spend a significant amount of time in the book on their relationship and on him pushing her a little bit more and a little bit more, urging her to use her abilities and telling her that if she uses a little bit, then she can demand something in return, and lying to her and manipulating her. And it's this really close, introspective look at this twisted man manipulating this child, and this child who just wants to get back to her dad. And it's devastating, and it's so sad, but so engaging despite being really slow. The book cuts all of it. The movie cuts all of it. The movie has Andy being the one captured. Charlie goes after him and decides she's gonna free him, rushes up to him, finds him very quickly, and rushes up to him and says, hey, I'm here to free you. I got your message. And Andy says, I didn't send you a message, Charlie. And then we cut back to John in the movie, who the implication is that he sent Charlie a message via mind link. So in the movie, John is a mind reader, and when he goes to kill Charlie's mom, he reads her mind in order to be able to try to track down Charlie a little bit better before he kills her. And when this came up in the movie, I thought, no, I don't like that. Why did they give him that ability? Because with this ability, it ruins the second half of the story where he doesn't have a look into her mind. He doesn't have a way to manipulate her except for a very common man way, which is just through emotional and verbal manipulation. And I just thought, it was so great in the book where he's constantly in his mind assessing situations, deciding how far he can go with what he's asking her to do. And if he can just read her mind and know, then it takes away so much of that tension. Also in the book, Andy is able, through his own ability to push, which I realize I've been using the word push in 2 different ways, which could get confusing. John isn't pushing in the same way that Andy does. Andy pushes against their consciousness. John is just pushing her in in a very human way, just asking her to do things and pulling back when she resists him. It's not the same. In the book, Andy is using his telekinesis to push someone to get a note to Charlie, to get him into a position where he can get to Charlie. And he gets this note to her where it says, meet me at place X and we're gonna get away together. Charlie gets the note. Oh, and in the note it also says, don't trust John. And so Charlie gets the note. She's devastated to hear that John isn't someone trustworthy and that all this time he's been lying and manipulating her. This is a huge thing because he's been her one confidant over all this time that she and her dad have been separated. And it's a large span of time. Over all this time, he's been the one person she trusts. And to find out that all this time he hasn't been trustworthy, it's devastating to this child. And so anyway, in the note, he says, don't let John know that you don't trust him, but don't trust him. So when John shows up to clean the floors, Charlie isn't quite the same. And he notices because he's such an analytical guy, because he's assessing every tiny little detail. And one of the really great moments in the book is when Charlie smiles at him and thinks she's being normal, but then distances herself a little bit. And that little shift John notices, hyper-analyzes, and goes over in his head and realizes something's wrong. And that leads to the climax of the story where Charlie and Andy are reunited, but John's there. And in the book, John shoots Andy. Andy dies, Charlie gets away. In the movie, Cap, who is a man in the book, but it doesn't matter, the Cap being played by a woman affects nothing. So that's a fine change. But in the book, Cap isn't an essential, he plays a role in the book and a significant role as a distraction, but he isn't that big of a deal. And in the movie, she isn't that big of a deal either. But they kind of push down John's character so that he's kind of not very notable, and then they elevate Cap's character, but not enough to really make her notable either. So in the climax, where in the book, John is still manipulating her and he's saying, yes, you're right. I didn't tell you the full truth. I did withhold some things from you, but I did it because I love you. I did it because I care about you. And then Charlie has this poor child who's been through so much has this internal, okay, do I trust John? I don't want him to have lied to me and to have manipulated me. Or do I trust my dad who says not to trust John? And she has this terrible moment in her head of not knowing what to do. In the movie, John's out of the equation. She had no significant relationship with him whatsoever. And instead, she gets to her dad. Cap is there and she's like, if you burn me, you burn him. And then her dad says, burn us. So she does. She is the one that kills her father, and then she goes berserk. Which, fair, if she was forced to murder her dad, it would make sense. Yeah, it makes sense that would make her go crazy and just kill everybody. Like, yeah, I get that. So I guess I'm not super mad about her going berserk and just killing everyone. I don't love it, but I don't mind it because it's a reasonable response after being forced to kill your own father, the one person in the world that you trust and that's left in your life. Makes sense. But then the movie ends on her killing everyone, sparing John for just no reason, and then going out, and then John coming to her and carrying her off. Do you know how much sense that makes? Why? In the movie, they have no meaningful connection. In the movie, the one interaction they had was after she found out that he killed her mom. Why is he carrying her off into the sunset? Why? I don't think there was a sunset. Why is he the significant ending? What are you even trying to articulate with this? Instead of her being manipulated and being controlled and being forced into using her abilities that she's been told all her life to suppress, and then her having this internal conflict of the one man left in her life, or the one person left in her life versus the one person who's given her any kind of friendship and camaraderie and safety and comfort. During her time of captivity, these two people telling her two opposing things and her having to make a choice. And instead of that, it's this guy that's barely been in the movie, that has had no impact on her, is who she leaves with for no reason. I don't even know what the movie was trying to articulate with that. Final thoughts. Let's do final thoughts. We're back to spoiler-free. If you are one of my spoiler-free people and you want to watch this movie, hopefully you're back here at this point in the movie. My final thoughts are, as an adaptation, it failed. The core of what the book was doing, it didn't do. As a movie on its own, apart from the book, I think it still failed. It just wasn't very interesting, and the ending didn't make sense. Generally, I don't think it did a good job. And that brings me to what I really want to say, which is, I think the reason King adaptations tend to not pan out well is because King excels at a couple of things. One, he writes suspense so well. He writes horror so well. He writes a feeling of unease in very human circumstances so well. All these things are fun to adapt. But the other thing that he does really well is writing humans really, really well. He writes vulnerable people in vulnerable circumstances that feel very real, that stem from reality, that stem from real life circumstances. And while this whole plot line certainly doesn't feel like real life circumstances, he took experimental drugs, the government testing people, he takes that and he takes it farther, which is a lot of what he does. He takes a baseline human idea and he takes it farther. And he doesn't write fast-paced, exciting, explosive books. There are fast-paced, exciting, explosive scenes in his books, but what he writes is a deep, introspective look into the human condition. And he uses horror and thriller elements to have that discussion. And I think that that's extremely difficult to translate to the screen. This very introspective, close look into humanity. It's a difficult thing to write in a book without it being boring, but he has such a captivating writing style that he pulls it off. And again, I have mixed feelings about King, but these are all things that I think he does wonderfully. I think that these things are really, really hard to adapt. And so what you end up with is either a really disloyal adaptation so that they can have more booms and explosions, or you have something that's fairly loyal and terribly boring. I think that King is just a really hard writer to adapt, and that's why a lot of times fans are disappointed with his adaptations. I think that Firestarter as a book was really, really good. There were some scenes that were unnecessary. There were some scenes that didn't work out so well. There are some things that aren't perfect about it, but it was a really good book. I enjoyed it a lot. I was really excited about the adaptation. I actually picked up the book because the movie trailer looked good, and so I wanted to experience both. I ended up really enjoying the book. I didn't enjoy the movie. My husband actually watched the movie with me, He has not read the book. He thought the movie was terrible. He was so very bored. There was actually a point where our characters were in danger and my husband made the comment, I don't care if they reunite. I don't care if she dies right now. Why would I care about these characters? And I think that sums up the movie very well, so I'll end it there. If you watched this movie, I'd love to hear what you thought about it. If you loved it, please tell me why. If you didn't, tell me why. If you don't plan to watch the movie, just have a chat with me in the comments. If you've read the book, let's talk about that too. I post videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and I post vlog videos on Thursdays on the second channel, which is linked in the description. I'll see you again soon. Bye.